Hello and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. Well, this week we're once again going to take a hard look at an important development overseas, the emergence of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as the Democrat and Republican Party candidates for the US presidential election in November this year. Given the dismal state of the global economy and the fact that 44% of Americans say the economy is their number one concern, what do we know about the economic policies of the two candidates? More importantly, what do these policies really mean for India? And helping me join the dots are two seasoned economists, Rajiv Kumar, Senior Fellow CPR, the Delhi-based think tank, and Rajat M, Distinguished Fellow, National Council of Applied Economic Research and former Managing Director General, Asian Development Bank. Welcome to the show, Rajiv and Rajat. It's been a period of exceptional bonhomie between India under Prime Minister Modi and the US under President Obama. But with the US getting ready to vote a new president into office, just when the Modi government is taking India closer to the US embrace, in the words of the Times of India headline last week, will the bonhomie last? Any relationship with a country as powerful as the US is bound to be both complex and multidimensional. But I'm going to focus only on one aspect, economic relations. And I'm going to start by asking each of you in turn, what is your assessment of the state of the US economy? Because that has to be the starting point for any discussion on economic relations between our two countries. Let me start with you, Rajat.
US economy is on an uptick, and I think Mr. Obama's economic policies have started to take root. Though the latest job figures or job creation figures are of some concern, but we'd still be seeing some economic growth, maybe 1-2% plus in the next year or so. Inflation is not a major concern, but I think the greater concern that you have outlined is what's going to happen after the elections. If it is Mrs. Clinton, I think the bonhomie with India will continue. She, of course, was very involved in President Obama's pivot to Asia, and India plays a very important role in that context. And I think she would want to see India as a very important strategic partner. Mr. Trump, I think, is totally unpredictable, so we don't know what will happen.
We'll come to the discussion about the different economic policies a little later, Rajat. My question was, what do you think is the state of the US economy? How well is it doing?
I think it's doing reasonably well, and I think you are going to see this strength continue. The economic growth prospects are, given the context of the global economy, not bad. They have been able to create several hundreds of thousands of jobs, though the most recent figures were a bit disappointing. And I think the effects of the global financial crisis have finally sort of worked itself through. They obviously have some major issues. Trade is obviously one. And I think we'll talk later about TPP and some of the others. But my own assessment of the US economy is generally positive. They have, I think, moved out of the woods. And if the present policies continue, I think it will still show, particularly with the price of oil still remaining rather soft, which should benefit the US economy.
Do you agree with that assessment, Rajiv? Is the US still the economic superpower that it was before the global financial crisis? Or is our obsession with US economic policies a bit overdone? Because according to the IMF, China accounted for about 16.5% of the world's PPP adjusted GDP by end 2014, while the US had slipped to second place. After all, US GDP is higher than China's GDP, but that's only because we're measuring it in dollar terms. If we use a more correct measuring rod, PPP, then the US has already slipped into number 2. So are we being a little unrealistic by being so obsessed about the US economy?
Well, not really, Mythili. We are not being unreal by being obsessed, about the U.S. economy, because PPP is all right, but in nominal terms, U.S. still accounts for a quarter of the world GDP, and therefore it's a power to reckon. It's an economic power to reckon with. And in fact, and even I dare say, even now, if the U.S. will catch a cold, the rest of the world will sneeze very loudly or even get a fever, which may not be the case in China's situation, in the sense that China is a major power, but US you can't discount the US. But just to say that I agree only partly with Rajat, because I just looked at some investment figures, and investment in the US is actually not doing too well. Private investment has refused to rise over the last 4 or 5 years, 5 or 6 years, ever since the crisis actually, and a lot of money, a lot of corporate profits are going into stocks and rebuying of the stocks by the US corporation, which is creating a bit of an asset Wall Street based asset bubble, which should cause a problem, which should cause a concern to everybody. Also, the last employment figures, just a few, about 75,000 or so, were very weak, which prompted the Fed not to raise the interest rates. And the fact that the interest rates are kept where they are by the Fed shows that the US authorities are themselves not sure about the US recovery. Now, the last point that I do want to mention here is that nothing has been done, unfortunately, under the Obama regime to reduce the inequality in the US, income inequality, whereby the top 1% actually still gathers away about 10% of the national wealth or the national GDP, and also the investment in infrastructure, which I thought was something that was promised by Obama, hasn't really come through because of the debt and the fiscal deficit issues that the Republicans have actually brought to bear on the decision making, and therefore they've effectively prevented that from happening. So all in all, US recovery, yes, but very fragile, yet not robust, and therefore something that we should be on the lookout for, because it could turn turtle any time.
So it's a mixed picture, but US economic policies clearly have the capacity to impact the global economy, and hence the economic policies of Clinton and Trump do matter. It's also a fact that Democrats are seen as Keynesian, while Republicans are seen largely as supply-siders. In fact, Trump seems cast in the mold of Ronald Reagan, the former US Republican president, who famously said, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." While Clinton seems to be more of a middle of the roader. But Rajat, if I were to ask you to describe the broad thrust of the economic policies and put your finger on essentially what distinguishes Trump from Clinton when it comes to economic policies, what would they be? We'll discuss the intricacies later, but very broadly, if you were to say pinpoint the key differences between the two, what would they be?
Well, I think Mr. Trump is very unpredictable. So I think, I certainly don't know, and I don't think he himself knows what his economic policies are. He seems to be sort of saying, look, government is the problem, and I'll do something about it, we don't know what it will be. Mrs. Clinton, I think, is going to get squeezed both from Bernie Sanders' side on the left and, of course, Mr. Trump on the right. So she, I think, is going to want to be expansionary. She's already talked about several programs she'll be bringing in. She has talked about the...
That's a Keynesian angle.
Very Keynesian angle. And as Rajiv says, invest in infrastructure, which was a priority for Mr. Obama, hasn't come through for various reasons, will be a priority, she says, for her administration, the Affordability Act, education plans, etc. So very Keynesian. But I'm afraid she, again, because of domestic pressures, is going to go more anti-trade, which is actually worrisome, particularly after having been a major architect of TPP. She seems to be softening her stance on that.
Rajiv, would you agree with Rajat's summing up of the key distinguishing elements of their respective economic policies, or do you see their differences as only skin deep? Because when it comes to US interests, regardless of whether the president is a Democrat or a Republican, the US has always been very insular. It thinks of the rest of the world only when its own interests are jeopardized. We saw that after the global financial crisis, when the US took the lead in the initial days because it wanted the G20 to orchestrate a coordinated rescue. But as the US economy started recovering, the US lost interest in the G20. So does it really make a difference to us in India who occupies the White House?
Well, it of course will make a big difference to us as to who occupies the White House, because even if the US policies are generally the same, irrespective of the party in power, president in power, there are nuances which make a big difference. For example, if there wasn't Mr. Bush, we would have never been able to sign a nuclear cooperation treaty. I mean, he pushed the agenda, he brought India into the nuclear club, etc. So there are these nuances which matter a lot. But let me make another caveat, sort of state another caveat here, which is that to judge the candidates by the electoral rhetoric that they spout and the sort of campaign that they lead while doing getting into the primaries and then beyond should not be used to evaluate what their policies would be when they actually do become the president, because I think these are two very different circumstances. there are two very different circumstances, and this is exactly the same in India. So you have seen that we haven't got 15 lakh rupees into our bank account, and the Americans also will not put up a wall between themselves and Mexico, despite what Trump might say from the top of his voice. So having said that, let me put the key differences as three that I find. One, I find that Trump is almost irrationally protectionist. He's belligerently and irrationally protectionist, and that I think it does for effect. For example, clamping a 25% tariff on China, and putting up a wall in Mexico, etc. He knows he won't do that, but he is belligerently, and therefore to that extent a little more dangerous, because we don't know if he is going that protectionist route as to what he might do even for our H-1B visas and for our own outsourcing. That's one. Two, Trump has said very clearly that he will reduce the highest tax rates from 35 to 15% for the super rich even, and has not talked anything about the super rich. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, says that she will tax the super rich, those earning above $5 million, and reduce the tax on middle class, middle income, middle class America. So that's the big difference between how they want to look at their revenue mobilization and want to tackle the debt problem in the US, which is a big problem. And the third one that I want to emphasize is that Hillary, because as Rajat said, she's the architect of the TPP, I have far more assurance that she will not go against the TPP. She will actually get the TPP ratified and will ratify the TPP, while Mr. Trump, in his belligerent protectionist mood, could well be, although one would expect that as a Republican he would favor the TPP, he could well drag his feet and cause lots of uncertainty on the TPP front. So those are the three key differences that I find between the two of them.
Okay, so Rajiv, quickly.
I would agree with Rajiv on the 3 points, but I would add that Mr. Trump is so unpredictable that all bets are off with him. I mean, I just have no idea, and as I said earlier, I don't think he does, what he will really do. So to that extent, he does become a very major concern for everybody all over the world.
He really is an unknown, but I'm afraid on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're trying to parse the economic policies of the two candidates for the US presidential election, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and what they possibly mean for India. Rajat, before the break, Rajiv spoke about three main differences between the two policies. But if you were to single out which aspects of US economic policies impact India the most, what would they be? Would it be trade, and related to that, the US penchant for regional trade blocs like the TPP, which Rajiv spoke about, rather than WTO, outsourcing? And in this area, which of the two candidates you think has a position that's more inimical to Indian interests? Our fears that Trump, with his call for protective barriers, which again Rajiv talked about, would he start a trade war? Do you think it's possible at all?
Well, Mr. Trump can do anything, but maybe when he comes into office, he'll be more rational. But I think, Mythili, the more important point is that USA will and should actually, as India should and will, decide whatever economic policies are in its own interest. Now, India will be, I think, a major issue for the US, more in a geopolitical strategic sense. India will play an important role because India and China will be two major concerns and are two major concerns for the US. So my feeling is that we should look not just at the economic policies, but it is really in a more larger geostrategic sense.
Yeah, of course. Economics
now,
is just part of it.
I think Mrs. Clinton will see India in a much more positive light, playing that role, as Mr. Obama has. Now, the regional trading blocs, I think I'm a bit less optimistic about TPP passing, even if Mrs. Clinton were to be in the White House.
But the TPP is not really to our advantage in any case.
Exactly. So my feeling is that TPP may actually not happen, and therefore the transatlantic partnership, which they're talking about, may not be even more unlikely. On the other hand, regional blocs like RCEP and others, which China, India are both going to be part of, will probably become more important. So my feeling is that irrespective of who is in the White House, economically, USA will remain very important for India and vice versa.
So you don't
but
see Trump as being more protectionist than Clinton?
You know, Trump, I think I agree with Rajiv that he's going to be more protectionist. But what he will actually do when power, we don't know. But at the moment, he's sort of, as Rajiv says very, I think rightly, irrationally sort of in a protectionist. But he will certainly, I think, be more protectionist than Mrs. Clinton. But as I said earlier, I'm a bit concerned that Mrs. Clinton, because of pressures both from the right and left, is also sounding at least more protectionist than I would expect her to be.
Rajiv, the Indian IT sector is perhaps the most immediately impacted by US economic policies. And related to this, we have the host of issues, the H-1B visas, where Trump has threatened, in fact, to raise the prevailing wage paid to H-1Bs in order, says he's forced companies to give what he calls these coveted entry-level jobs to domestic workers. There's also the vexed problem of totalization of social security payments made by temporary Indian workers in the US who don't get any benefits in return, but don't get back their contributions either. So as far as the Indian IT sector is concerned, whose policies do you think will be better for us, Clinton or Trump?
Clearly Clinton's, Mythili, simply because Hillary Clinton will tend to follow and pursue what Obama administration has done already. By that I mean that if you look at the recent
because she's
Modi
part of the
Obama,
government, yes.
Yeah, because if you look at the Modi-Obama joint statement just now, they say that they are already discussing for 1 year the totalization agreement and that they want to conclude it in the next year. And one would assume that this will happen under Hillary Clinton's regime rather than Trump, because Trump would tend to say, I don't want this. If they want to come here, they better pay for this, because this is a coveted market. See, Trump is about America, making America great and America being great. So he'll act from that point of view, so that everybody who wants to interact with the US will have to pay a price for that, as it were. And therefore, whether it is the raising of the entry level wage or it is the totalization agreement, etc., everything will be up for grabs and there will be no continuity. And as far as India is concerned, a continuity in our economic relationship is far better. For example, Trump might even, we might even question, for example, as giving us the major defense partner status that Obama has just done. My other fear though is that Trump, in his anti-China rhetoric and his anti-China stance, might push us much harder to take a tough stand vis-a-vis China, and might push us and might almost make it a conditionality, as it were, for India to become a front state, in Trump's belligerence towards China. And that would be a pity, because we of course can't afford that. We will not do it. And because we want to maintain equidistant. So that will harm our economic relationship with the US. But let me end by saying, Mythili, on this point, that our economic relationship with the US has actually moved only sideways in the last 5 or 6 years. Despite the ratcheting up of our geostrategic partnership, both under Manmohan Singh and now under Modi, if you look hard at the numbers and all the details of the economic relationship, it has really gone nowhere. And for all you know, it might get ratcheted up during a Trump regime more than what it would get under Clinton.
Yes, certainly.
On this point,
sure,
Rajiv, you make an interesting point. India has done well usually under Republican administration economically, and with Mr. Trump, who knows, maybe that will happen.
But certainly, as I said, there are a lot of imponderables regardless of who comes to power, and clearly Clinton seems to be better. But if you shift from trade to the dollar's position, Rajat, as part of the international reserve currency, it seems unassailable for now. Even though post the global financial crisis, the US macroeconomic fundamentals worsened and in fact were not very much better than that of many third world countries. So for a brief period of time, we saw calls for a new reserve currency and a new world economic order to replace the Bretton Woods system, and that earlier put the dollar in pole position. There was also hope that we would see more meaningful reform of the IMF. Who do you think will be more amenable to meaningful reform of the IMF as we want it, Clinton or Trump? And once again, will it be Clinton?
No doubt. I think Mrs. Clinton will certainly be more rational. But that does not necessarily mean that she'll be necessarily more accommodating. Because the US interest will prevail, which of course it should. But I think Mrs. Clinton will see the need for the US remaining very much a part of the international economic order in a rational, meaningful way. But that does not mean that we'll see more reforms in the IMF. We've seen some which are encouraging but still very minimal. And I'm not very optimistic that whether it's Clinton or Trump, we'll see any more reforms there of any significance. Dollar, however, I think for the foreseeable future will remain very key. though the Chinese yuan is now part of the SDR, and I think you'll continue seeing the growing importance of China. But with the euro coming under greater threat now, and particularly with Brexit and all the other uncertainty that comes with it, I think you'll see the dollar remaining a very important pole currency for the foreseeable future.
Yes, it does look like that. But Rajiv, everything that Trump says really needs to be taken not just with a pinch of salt, but maybe with the buckets of salt. So even so, should we be really concerned when Trump says that he wants to be the jobs president? And in his speech declaring his candidacy for presidency, he had proclaimed, "I will be the greatest jobs president God ever created." So as a result of that, will we see rise of much greater protectionist barriers and even what you talked about? Why is there this talk of preserving jobs when according to the latest US figures, US unemployment is close to an all-time low of less than 5%? And will this impact India? What happens to the jobs that Indians are hoping to get in the US, even if they are temporary jobs?
Well, I mean, I firmly believe that Trump's rhetoric is far ahead of what he will do actually in practice. And as you said yourself, given that the US unemployment level is at the lowest for the last so many years, and 5% is in fact taken very often as a natural rate of unemployment of the US. What more jobs would what Mr. Trump would be able to create? I don't understand. I think what this does is to appeal to the to the blue and the white collar middle America, the white America, whose jobs are threatened. But given the fact that he is a Republican and that he will be influenced by the US multinational corporations, although he says he is so rich that he doesn't need their support, but nonetheless he would have to listen to them. He will not be able to take steps which raise their costs and makes these corporations globally uncompetitive. So I'm not too scared of that at all. What I'm a little more scared of is for Trump to come out firing and saying all these Bretton Woods institutions are useless and redundant and US will have nothing to do with it, which can be a Republican stance as it was in the case of the UN. And they say that and US will deal with all the countries bilaterally, etc. So that's the kind of that's the kind of irrational imperialistic sort of logic which makes me scared more, because Trump can be far more destructive for the institutions, for the global economic institutions that we have, than Clinton would ever be. And that's what disturbs me, and that was just that's what makes me a little scared.
Absolutely, that's what we call Clinton is more of the middle of the road. But Rajat, another area where Clinton and Trump differ quite markedly is in the area of taxation, with Clinton inclined to raise taxes on the rich and on capital gains, while Trump wants to lower the tax burden. And as far as India is concerned, will these differences in domestic taxation really impact us by say reducing American corporates' ability to invest? Or should we be more concerned with how much cooperation we get from the US on things like sharing tax information and BEPS? And if that is the case, who is likely to be more willing to work with India, Clinton or Trump? Once again, will you say it's Clinton?
No, I think there are 2 points here. I think in terms of sharing information and the talk about the
tax evasion,
and also avoiding double taxation,
havens, yes.
Getting the social security payments and all, I feel that a Trump administration probably would be more open, just because this may be part of their sort of general sort of policy towards not only India but the rest of the world. But on the tax rates, that will be driven by totally domestic reasons, and it probably won't affect us much. And I think Mrs. Clinton certainly would be more concerned about raising taxes on the rich, and Mr. Trump on reducing.
So will it impact the corporate's ability to invest?
I don't think so. I think the corporate investments that they make are not based on the marginal tax rates on the rich or the middle income. So that will continue to be driven by potential opportunities in India and elsewhere. But I think on the information sharing, etc., Mr. Trump may actually, Republican administration may be actually more amenable.
Okay, well, it's almost time for us to end this program. But before I end, let me ask both of you very quickly, who would you vote for? After all, if US policies are going to affect all of us, maybe we should be also given a say. So Rajiv, who would you vote for? Tell me.
I would not vote for Trump in any case. I don't like the man.
What about
I don't like what he says. I don't like what he says, and I don't like what he stands for.
Well, so many Americans seem to. Rajat, what about you?
I mean, I totally agree with Rajiv that we wouldn't vote for Trump. But I think, Rajiv, you've got to go a step further. You've got to say who you'll vote for. And I would definitely vote for Mrs. Clinton.
Well, since they're only two and you're not going to vote for Trump, and I don't know whether they have the Nona vote at all.
Sort of, you can always spoil your vote.
No.
Okay. But I'm afraid that's all the time we have in this edition of Macros with Mythili. So we'll have to call an end to this discussion. And on a very reassuring note that both Rajat and Rajiv believe that whatever the differences between Clinton and Trump on their economic policies, whoever comes to power after the US elections in November, the US will have to remain engaged with the world. Yes, Trump is an unknown entity, tends to shoot his mouth off, but even so, I think we need not get too despondent over it. Thank you so much for joining me, Rajat, as well as Rajiv. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.